Thanks a lot. Sorry I was a little late today. Decided to grab a rental car at the last minute. So I'm not going to be long, despite the fact that I'm screwed up. The majority of government school history teachers will not agree with what I'm going to say here today, but thank God, and my parents, I was never their student. There is one thing they would agree with me on. They heard what I was going to say today, which is that dates are really important, and I hope to prove that today. So there are many things wrong with America, but there's only one ultimate solution: separation of education and the state or the government. And I know you are here to solve one problem, how to best educate your children, but I want to try to convince you today that in so doing, you are doing the most important thing you could do to save America as well. America is a lot older than we are taught. 1776 was a culmination, not a beginning. America was already 169 years old in 1776. Massachusetts produced the first compulsory school law in 1852, but only after America had existed for 245 years. America was one of the most successful and literate countries on earth before government schools came to dominate our lives. We became the leading economy in the world before most states had compulsory school laws. Even by 1900, when America was an economic powerhouse, only half of America's children attended government schools. In 1900, only 14% of Americans had finished high school. So even after 293 years of existence, government schools were not a major factor. We have been led to believe that government schools had always been there, and that they were responsible for our success as the greatest country that has ever existed. But this is a big lie. America was the greatest country on earth for ordinary people before government schools came to dominate our kids' lives in the early and mid-20th century. And we continued to thrive for several decades in spite of, not because of, these schools. Then stagflation hit in the early 70s, and the wages of average Americans began a period of stagnation. Various foreign wars following 9/11 burned up trillions of dollars and started a period of actual decline lasting to the present day. So I hope I have exploded the myth that American greatness was caused by government schools. The truth is, we were great before government schools, and we stagnated and declined precisely when these schools were at their peak of influence from the 1970s through the present. And while they were buttressed by the creation of the Department of Education in 1979, were dominated by teachers' unions and received massive funding from all levels of government, averaging nearly 6% of GDP. Let me drill down on this notion that one, we need the government to educate our kids, and two, the government is capable of providing such an education. I've already demonstrated that America was a great country well before government schools had a real impact, and that America started to decline when these schools were at their apex of influence. Beyond that, the whole glorious history of Western civilization is mostly devoid of a government role in the progress of true ideas. Here's a short list of homeschooled folks, and I'm going to read it fast. George Washington, John Adams, Grover Cleveland, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Leonardo da Vinci, Claude Monet, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Orville and Wilbur Wright, Charles Dickens, Robert Frost, C.S. Lewis, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Chaplin, Benjamin Franklin, Ansel Adams, Frank Lloyd Wright, Winston Churchill, George Washington Carver, Albert Einstein, Amelia Earhart, Louisa May Alcott, Jane Austen, Mark Twain, George Bernard Shaw, Irving Berlin, Mozart, Andrew Carnegie, Robert Louis Stevenson, Walt Whitman, Isaac Newton, Florence Nightingale, Booker T. Washington, Patrick Henry, Abigail Adams, Noah Webster, and of course, Justin Timberlake. I have a joke in the speech somewhere. I'm actually a pretty funny guy. I'm not as serious as I'm coming off today, believe me. Have a beer with me sometime. So I think I have shown that we don't need the government to educate our kids, but let's go even further. I like to ask the questions that other people don't ask. Is the government even capable of educating our kids? New York State exists because George Washington and the French beat the British at Yorktown. Washington could certainly have taught your kids how to organize a large standing army and deploy it. But I suspect that the woman who now runs New York State schools, Kathy Hochul, lacks any military teaching abilities. She is good at one thing and one thing only, winning elections. If you want your child to learn how to be a politician, then Hochul would be a wonderful teacher. Is there any reason to think that government has any other educational skills? No. What does government do? Government is good at seizing control of territory, taxing the population to support itself, and suppressing any competition. What is their expertise exactly in the pursuit of true human knowledge? Time is short, so let me quote from my book, Government Schools Are Bad for Your Kids. In light of the obvious propaganda function of government schools, it must be emphasized that on a wide range of subjects, government schools would appear to be incapable of providing proper instruction at all. These include all the subjects where political philosophy plays an obvious role: history, civics, politics, law, ethics, and economics. Economist Ludwig von Mises believed it was impossible to deal with any chapter of history without taking a definite stand on implied economic doctrines. He added, the party that operates the schools, and we know what party that is in a position to propagandize its tenets and to disparage those of other parties. Is it any surprise that when granted a monopoly on teaching kids about politics, the American kids view government as the solution to all human problems and act accordingly on election day? America's greatness will not be restored until the government school monopoly is broken up. That is why you are not only doing the best you can for your children by homeschooling, but you're also doing your part to save the country from its continuing and obvious decline. I did write a book in 2009 called Government Schools Are Bad for Your Kids, What You Need to Know. I argued then that only a massive withdrawal from the schools could turn the country around. People weren't ready for that message back then, but now, thanks to homeschooling advocates like Melissa and Jennifer, they are now. By pulling your kids out now, you save them from the crime, sex, and drugs that are rampant in government schools, whether urban, rural, or suburban. That's a big myth that there's some difference. The statistics are pretty much the same wherever you go. You save them from the steady stream of left progressive propaganda that gets worse every year, and you save them from the pointless cruelty of the lockdown, which is really a war on young people. When I was a kid, many centuries ago, there was a pretty bad flu epidemic that caused 1 million deaths worldwide. How did the fearless greatest generation of our parents and their spoiled baby boom kids respond? They held a little party called Woodstock. I remember 1968 like it was yesterday. I remember the day MLK was shot. I remember the day RFK was shot. Nixon beat Humphrey, who I had seen I saw him when he spoke at the Buffalo Odd. But I don't remember anyone talking about the flu in 1968 or ruining the lives of our children because of it. But the point I want to impress upon you is this: just because your kids escaped from government schools, as ours did, doesn't mean you can bury your head in the sand about government schools. You still have to live in a country where, for now, 90% of the people went to government school. you still have to pay for your share of the $1 trillion cost of K through 12 government schools. That 90% will tend to vote for policies that make government bigger, and their votes will swamp those who disagree. The extremely well-paid government school teachers with lots of leisure time will continue to dominate the political process in favor of one party that wants to tax you more, regulate you more, and will support laws that make homeschooling more difficult, as we'll talk about today. On the other hand, the more people we can encourage to homeschool, the more we can reverse all these forces and trends hostile to our liberty. That is why Dwayne Whitmer and I plan to launch a campaign to encourage homeschooling so we can reach a critical mass of support to cause a genuine, peaceful political revolution in America. One of our priorities will be to make sure that the billions of dollars of money saved by homeschooling families is returned to the taxpayers and does not disappear into the bottomless pit of government budgets. You will be hearing more about this project at libertymovement.org and dwaynewhitmer.com in the coming weeks. In the meantime, I will be publishing a sequel to government schools called Free the Children to encourage Americans in red states to immediately repeal compulsory school laws. The book also updates the research of the original book, and yes, I found that every problem I talked about in government schools has gotten worse in the last 12 years. What a shock. But you don't have to live in a red state to free your children. You can do so now in this blue state. This program today will show you how. Thank you.